Hi. So in this video we're going to take a look at factorizing algebraic expressions. First things first, what does it mean to factorize an algebraic expression? To cut the long story short, factorizing means finding out what do we need to multiply together in order to get an expression. If you take a look at this example, right? If you take a look at this example, number 16, maybe number 12. Number 12 is a number that we can factorize, which means that we can find out what do we multiply together in order to get that number. So for instance, we can multiply 1 times 12. We can multiply 2 times 6, 3 times 4. And then you can go in reverse, but it doesn't really matter. So I found what do I multiply together to get the number that I started with, and I factorized 12 over here. The highlighted numbers 1, 12, 2, 6, 3 and 4 are factors of 12, and that's all well and good. That's no problem. It gets a little bit more difficult if we have to factorize expressions that are algebraic. So an expression like 6x plus 18y, 6x plus 18y. How do I deal with this? That's a great question. So one of the methods of factorizing algebraic expression is the highest common factor method. And it works in particular in this case where we have a number of terms in expression and those terms have all the same common factor. And that highest common factor is what we're going to use in order to factorize the expression. So how do I do it? I do it as follows. 6x plus 18y is the same as 2 times sorry, let me rewrite a little bit differently. It's the same as 3 times 2x. So 6x can be factorized into 3 times 2x. And the same way I factorize 18y into 3 times 6y. So you clearly see that 6x turned into 3 times 2x and 18y turned into 3 times 6y. Now if you notice, 3 is something that shows up in each of those factorized terms. So I can take it outside of the bracket. The way I take it out of the bracket, and taking out of the bracket is just the name I give to this step that I do over here. Taking it out of the bracket. I write it outside of a bracket. But then I need to put something into the bracket, right? So I put whatever was beside the number when I factorized my expression. So in order to do so, I put 2x and plus 6y. And that's my factorized expression. I can check that this is my factorized expression by multiplying or by expanding this expression out of the bracket. So 3 times 2x is the same as 6x, 3 times 6y is the same as 18y, and I ended up with the same thing as I started. So that's how I factorize by highest common factor. Another example of the same operation can be as follows. I have 2x squared y minus 6x squared z, minus 6x squared z. This is a slightly more difficult looking example, but again, I can find out what are my common factors. So 2x squared y and minus 6x squared z have a common factor of 2x squared. How do I know this? Well, I can rewrite each of those terms as follows. I have, that's 2x squared times y minus 2x squared times 3 times z. So now you can see that I have common factor in those two terms, and I can take that common factor out of the bracket. So I end up with 2x squared, and inside of the bracket I have y minus 3z. So in order to factorize expression by highest common factor, I need to first identify the highest common factor. So I'll find some space over here. First, identify the HCF, the highest common factor. Then I divide each term by the highest common factor, or I take it out of the highest common factor. The way to understand this, it would be useful for you to practice this a little bit, and then you'll understand that step, that taking the highest common factor out. So I'm just going to say that we have to divide terms by HCF, and then write the result with HCF out of the bracket. Okay, let's do a couple more examples. So let's take a look at this example. For instance, 5xy squared, 5xy squared minus 20x squared y, 20x squared y. Okay, so my first term consists of 5 times x times y squared. My second term consists of minus 20 times x squared times y. So I need to identify what is my highest common factor. Well, both terms are divisible by 5, so it's definitely going to be 5 included in the highest common factor. Now, what other term repeats itself into both? What other variable, let's say, or coefficient repeats itself into both terms? So in this case, that term is x, because I have x in this expression, in this term, and I have x in this expression. So it's definitely going to be 5x. Let me just write it in the black marker. So I have 5x is my common term. Now, as I said, I identified the highest common factor. Now I divide each of the terms of the expression by highest common factor. So if I divide 5xy squared by 5x, I'm going to end up with y squared. And if I divide minus 20x squared y, I'm going to end up with minus 4xy. And that's the result of this factorization. It's important to understand that in order to know what is going to remain in the bracket once you complete your factorization, you need to do a number of practice examples so that you're familiar with the way the procedure follows. Let's do another example. Let's do something like this. 2a squared b minus 4ab squared plus 12abc. So let's see how can we factorize this. What coefficient is present in each of those terms? So I can tell you that it's 2, because 12, 4, and 2 are all divisible by 2. Now, what variable is common to all of those terms in the expression? So a and b are in the first term, a and b are in the second term, and a and b are in the third term. So we can definitely say that a, b is going to be in our highest common factor. Now, seeing that I identified it, I need to take the highest common factor out of the bracket and write what's going to remain. So if I divide 2a squared b by 2ab, all I'm going to end up with is just a, because take a look at this. That b is jumping out of the bracket, that 2 is jumping out of the bracket, and I have a times a, so one of those a's is jumping out of the bracket, and one of those a's is staying in the bracket. Now inside the bracket, I have the second term, minus 4ab squared. So minus 4 divided by 2 is minus 2. Then that a is jumping out of the bracket. One of those b's is jumping out of the bracket, so I end up with minus 2b. And finally, 12abc. So 12 divided by 2 is plus 6. One of my a's is jumping out of the bracket. It's outside. The b is outside of the bracket. And inside of the bracket, all I'm going to end up is with is c. Let me just correct this b over here because it looks like 6 minus 2b. Maybe one more example. Yeah, let's do this one. 10 p squared q plus 5 p q squared. So the common factor into coefficients is 5 because 5 goes into 10 and 5 goes into 5, so I can write it out of the bracket. Now let's look at what repeats itself in each of those terms. We have both p's and q's, so definitely p and q can come out both. P and q. And what's going to end up in the bracket? Well, if I take 5 out, I'm going to end up with 2, so because 10 divided by 5 is 2. If I take p out of the bracket, I have 2 in the beginning. Now I'm only going to end up with 1, so it's 2p. And I'm taking q out of the bracket, so that q is going to stay out of the bracket. And inside I'm just going to have 2p. And plus, if I take 5 outside of the bracket, that 5 is outside, so definitely not inside of the bracket. Then p is out of the bracket, and q is out of the bracket. But I have 2 q's in this expression, so then I can say that it's 2p plus q. And that's how I do it. So again, to multiply by taking out the highest common factor, first of all, to factorize by finding out the highest common factor, first of all, I need to identify the highest common factor. Second of all, I need to take the highest common factor out of the bracket by dividing each of the terms of expression by that highest common factor. And third of all, inside of the bracket, I need to put in the results of that division. And carrying out that division is what you need to practice. If you have any questions about this, let me know in the comments. And thanks for watching, and we'll continue our algebra series in the next video. Thanks very much.